As humans, we think that progress is inevitable and that technology will just get better. Today, you're probably listening to this episode on a phone or a laptop, devices that are pretty much just extensions of our body. Yet there was a time when using computers was reserved for experts. Without breakthroughs in design and user experience, computers would have remained as calculators, and phones would have never fit in our pockets. Now it feels like we're in a similar position with AI. OpenAI's chatbot may appear polished and ready for prime time, but in reality we're just scratching the surface. The true challenge with AI isn't just building more powerful and capable models. It's building user interface and experiences that make engaging with agents more simple, intuitive, and trustworthy. Designing these human-agent interfaces is perhaps one of the most critical innovations that are yet to happen. And it isn't immediately obvious to most people why this is so important but so difficult. Because if we fail to build tools that enable us to easily communicate with agents, AI will never deliver on its promise. Today I'll explore why this gap exists. We're going to take a trip through time, all the way to Douglas Engelbart's 1968 demo that led to Xerox PARC and Steve Jobs' Apple redefining user interface for computing. And in doing so, I hope to unpack the real challenges with building user interface that enables humans and agents to work together. Welcome to the show. I'm Jack Horton, and this is In the Loop. Right now, there's a real big problem with AI, and it's how agents and humans communicate with each other. And I don't think most people grasp how big and important a challenge this is to work through. Kind of look at ChatGPT and think, job done. We are so far away from that being the truth. And, when you actually think about how difficult this is, it makes me even more inspired by people who are able to reimagine things. Creativity isn't easy. It's just as easy to just replicate the exact same thing that's come before. Letters became emails, even the icons basically identical. And suddenly analogies and the way we understand analogies in the context of new technology become extra important. Because an analogy forces us to think in a certain way, and that can make us more or less creative. So take that email example. You can either now recreate email, or you can try and create something entirely new. Both could be the right direction, but both could take away that creativity. So when it comes to this human-agent collaboration, it's really not easy to create experiences that make communication simple. How much information should be provided to a user, for example? Or how are we supposed to know what an agent can actually do? How do we understand what its process is or what its limitations are? These are all big challenges in the world, and it's challenges that Mindset and we're as a team trying to work through all the time. So I'm going to try and break these down and give you kind of an indication of where we think this world of user interface for agent and human collaboration is actually going. Now, I absolutely love history, and when I was thinking about this episode, it's almost impossible not to kind of reflect and think about the history of computing and user interface and everything from Apple and all the amazing things that happened. So I'm going to use this episode as a complete excuse to, nerd out and go on a real journey of computing. I think you'll find it really interesting, but it really does relate to where we're at with agent-human collaboration. So let's start in 1968, a real pivotal year. So a man called Douglas Engelbart introduced what was called the mother of all demos to this big packed-out crowd in San Francisco. And this basically was a machine that allowed people to edit text and navigate through documents and video chat, all using this weird thing. There was this wooden circle that he called a mouse. So before this, the computer was basically just a big calculator. You had to be a programmer and be technical. The idea of using computers, it wasn't as widespread at that point. So just imagine how astonishing and powerful this was. Now, Engelbart's vision went so much further than the computer just being this simple calculator. He saw it as an extension of a human mind and body, this tool that could make us think clearly and achieve more ambitions. So a huge influence on what was to come later on. Now, obviously at the time, Engelbart's system required massive servers and equipment. It was very expensive. It was obviously very new as well. So it was really limited by the technology of the day. But I think this lesson is really relevant today with AI systems. Kind of reminds me exactly how OpenAI gave LLMs this new face, a chatbot. This new way to engage with this huge, incredible technology. But obviously it's still very expensive to run. It requires how to do prompting properly. Still faces a lot of challenges with being consistent, having trust. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't millions of people getting value from it, but it reminds me of kind of the early days of maybe computing. Anyway, if you fast forward a few years to the early 1970s at a place called Xerox PARC. So Xerox was the company that was basically a printing services company. And PARC is Palo Alto Research Center. So this is where a team from Xerox all got together with this really fantastic team of engineers and began turning this vision from Engelbart into something that's very tangible. So at PARC, the Alto workstation was born. Now, this machine suddenly enabled people to have overlapping windows on their computer that you probably recognize today. Suddenly, icons for their applications, and suddenly a mouse-driven interface. They also built bitmap displays that managed to render text and images that obviously at the time was incredibly crisp. And they even did experiments, and some successful, with networking many different computers together into one system. Again, reimagining the interface and experience around something that's incredibly transformative. Because remember, at that point, computers weren't on everybody's desk. They weren't this widespread, highly adopted thing that revolutionized society at that point. Now, all of this should have made the Alto workstation one of the most successful products in the world, and it should have made Xerox incredibly successful. It was truly that game-changing. But just like today, people just didn't understand how important this new user interface and these new capabilities were. So despite this huge breakthrough at PARC, the corporate leadership at Xerox just didn't see any potential. They were obviously super focused on their core copier business. They treated the Alto workstations as basically massive, expensive research projects, rather than this incredible product that could just transform everything. Now, obviously, everything changed when Steve Jobs in 1979 got a sneak peek at this. Now, there's a whole story about how he actually got into that I'm just not going to go into. Super interesting. But obviously, they had a 3-day visit that was, you could argue, is one of the most influential 3 days in history. And if you listen to this clip of Steve Jobs, you'll understand why.
One of the things they showed me was object-oriented programming. They showed me that, but I didn't even see that. The other one they showed me was really a networked computer system. They had over 100 Alto computers, all networked, using email, et cetera, et cetera. I didn't even see that. I was so blinded by the first thing they showed me, which was the graphical user interface. I thought it was the best thing I had ever seen in my life. Now, remember, it was very flawed. What we saw was incomplete. They'd done a bunch of things wrong, but we didn't know that at the time. It's still, though, they had the germ of the idea was there, and they'd done it very well. And within, 10 minutes, it was obvious to me that all computers would work like this someday.
Now, Jobs obviously also just didn't want to copy what he saw. He wanted to simplify it. So always with Steve Jobs was, how do we simplify this further? And obviously Apple's designers took a lot of those innovations, stripped away a lot of the unnecessary complexity, got rid of any clunky, multi-button mouse with this incredible, sleek, single mouse, single button version, and essentially turned these technical icons for apps into these really friendly images. Basically, they just made everything easier to understand and use for normal people. All of this obviously went into the Mac. Again, I think this is just such an important lesson in human-agent collaboration when it comes to building user interface and user experience. Apple showed that the most advanced technology only becomes truly powerful when it's understandable and easy to use. So now if we fast forward to today, I think this is where the challenges of agents really begin. So obviously most agents and AI systems are really powerful, but they're obviously extremely mysterious and even unpredictable. And this is a problem because, research shows that when people don't trust things, they won't use it. And I mean, Nielsen found that about 68% of people don't actually trust the responses because they don't know how the AI got to an answer. And this is where user interface and innovations around user interface must happen. We have to find the right way of enabling communication between the system and users. So in terms of these challenges, if we start to think about breaking them down, we've got transparency and this idea of verification. So agents have to find a way to lay out its decision-making process to a person. You're starting to see this from maybe DeepSeek and OpenAI with their R1 model and their O3 model. Even that I don't think is terribly useful. It's more marketing than substance, because obviously the transparency aspect of the seeing the reasoning allows us to verify the AI's decisions and thought process, so you can have that kind of shared understanding of what's happening behind the scenes. But it's not easy to obviously find the right way to quickly convey that, enable people to understand it, and use that to direct the agent and influence the agent. So if I ask, of all people listening, how many of you are actually using that reasoning breakdown, maybe from DeepSeek or OpenAI, to reprompt the system or to influence an AI's actions? So I think even if you do, it's quite laborious and time-consuming and frustrating. So I think there's a lot of big leaps that can be made here. Next, you might have control and consistency. So this is where technology often has to behave predictably. Otherwise, trust is going to completely erode. And it's really difficult because AI inherently can be unpredictable because of the way it gets to a response. So you need to be able to rely on the system to be consistent, because otherwise you can't form a reliable understanding of what's going to happen next and how it works. So and if an agent is being erratic, it makes you feel uneasy and you avoid using it. But then again, how do you, as a provider of technology, we're building this technology, convey consistency? How do you make people feel safe and that they can expect what's going to come next? Another one is this idea of adaptive detail. So this is the idea that not every user needs that same amount of information all the time. Some people might appreciate just a really quick summary of what an AI did. Others might really want a detailed explanation at every step. So the ideal system, therefore, is going to have to adjust based on a person, so they get the right amount of detail and context, and nothing more, nothing less. Another big challenge is around memory. So that's remembering past interactions. So obviously when the AI retains conversation context or throughout threads, you can have a bit more of a personalized experience and you don't have to re-repeat yourself, and you can have a bit more of rapport with whatever you're having a conversation with. But there's a real fine balance here. We talk to a lot of customers, we talk to people in the market. People see memory as this really exciting place, and it really is. But actually there's a lot of nuances here to work through. Too much information being stored is going to clutter an experience, but too little and it feels impersonal or disconnected or basically quite stupid. Or if it remembers the wrong things or not remembered the right important things, or it tries to maybe remember too much every time it answers. Because if it then tries to remember too much every time it responds, there's a lot more processes and information it's trying to get through before it can reply. So it's going to be a lot slower. So every one of these decisions can have a trade-off. So being able to decide that it needs to use only a little bit of memory for this request, but then other times it needs to use a lot of its memory. Again, really interesting and difficult challenges to work through. I think at the heart of all these challenges is this way of creating an effective two-way communication system between agents and humans. As a person, we just want to be able to just tell it what we want to achieve. We want it to know our preferences already. We just want the agent to go do its thing, to keep us informed maybe about certain actions, maybe explaining its decisions, giving us some nudges or alerts if it needs, or if something unexpected happens, to maybe pop up again. Therefore, this is what we have to build towards. But again, this is why I stress it's such an important piece of innovation that I don't think has been nailed in the world yet. Now, as you can tell, Mindset, myself, our team, we do a lot of research and thinking into this. We're an agent platform that lets people build, manage, and deploy agents. Now, the good thing is there are some researchers in the world that are proposing interesting design patterns. So one popular approach right now is using agent cards. So these are kind of simple summaries that break down what an agent can do or what it can't do, and even if it's kind of ethical guidelines. Another framework is this idea of plan, presentation, and approval. So this is where the AI kind of shows you its intended actions, waits for you to confirm before proceeding. So if you imagine a visual breakdown of the steps, maybe you can dig into those steps. So this gives you a lot of control of the process that the agent's about to go on. So there's also this idea of dialogue-based inspection, which basically lets you ask an AI directly, why did you do that? And you get a very clear explanation, and maybe there's a way of using that explanation to give it feedback that it memorizes for later. Another idea is post hoc explanations. So that basically is where the agent gives you an explanation of what it did or its key actions after they occur. So as you can imagine, there's a huge amount of work we've all got to do here to make this user interface and user experience for an agent-driven world truly work. And I think all of these ideas and strategies boil down to kind of one central idea: that modern AI won't fall short because it's not powerful enough. It's going to fall short because it's not able to communicate with humans. So we have to try and find a way to bridge this gap between this raw capability and just usability. You know, the work of Engelbart, Xerox PARC, Steve Jobs, all teaches us that really important lesson that technology just has to be designed with people in mind. It's just not enough for AI to be super powerful if it doesn't communicate effectively with people. So I think this is an incredibly interesting time. You know, as we move forward right now, the choices we're all making are going to shape the future of AI, and I think by extension, the future of much of the world. We have this amazing opportunity to create a system that's not just powerful, but is accessible, is transparent, and is trustworthy. Basically creating a true partnership between humans and machines. I hope you've enjoyed this deep dive. I know I've really enjoyed it, and I to be honest, I'm going to do this more often. But anyway, I'll see you next Wednesday.